He came with me. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and start asking questions if that's okay.
Sure.
We have several questions here. We're going to start out with, what would you say was the most rewarding moment you experienced while writing Lavender's Lies Bleeding?
Well, I love that question. First, though, let me start by saying thank you for the invitation and what a pleasure it is to visit with you. I'm coming to you there in Tennessee through the magic of Zoom. I am in northwestern Montana, which is where many of my books are set, including my Food Lovers Village mysteries and my 2 standalones written as Alicia Beckman, and my historical short story collection, All God's Sparrows, which you can see over my shoulder. But what we're mostly here to talk about today are the Spice Shop mysteries, which are set in Seattle, where my main character, Pepper Reese, runs a spice shop in Pike Place Market and solves crime. And you might be wondering, how does a woman from Montana write authentically about Seattle? Well, I went to college there many, many years ago. And then after law school, I went back to Seattle and practiced for a number of years. And I fell in love with Pike Place Market. Gosh, I'd have to admit, it's almost 50 years ago now, when I was a teenager and first went out to Seattle University. And that was in the late 1970s, 1977. And the market had just been saved by the voters, saved from urban removal, a phrase I'm sure some of you have heard, where city leaders wanted to destroy the market, which was founded in 1907, and replace it with who knows what. But people in the city understood that it was the heart and soul and the stomach of the city. It had tremendous history, and while it was pretty run down then, they voted to tax themselves to create a public market district, a historic preservation district. And it's because of that that all these years later, that happened in 1971. And it's because of that that all these years later, we have this fabulous market. And so what I did with the Spice Shop series was go back to the things I loved about living in the city. And the market was first among them. It really is a wonderful place. It's changed a lot. It's a lot more tourist focused now than it used to be, because we don't need specialty shops in quite the same way. Grocery shopping has changed. You know, you can buy kiwi and fresh ground peanut butter at your Safeway, and those used to be things you couldn't get so easily, along, of course, with all the fresh produce and the fish. And so when I started thinking about writing a second cozy series, I chose the market because I loved it and because I wanted to do something different from my Food Lovers Village series, which is your classic small town series. This is an urban cozy, and there are more and more of them. But when I started this series, the first book came out in 2015, there weren't a whole lot of cozies set in cities. I'm sure many of you know Cleo Coyle's Coffee House Mysteries. Cleo and I share Tuesdays on the blog Mystery Lover's Kitchen, and she was one of my inspirations. If you can set a cozy mystery series in Greenwich Village in New York City, then you can set one almost anywhere. the key is that community within a community. And that's what the market has. And I gave you that history to explain that it's literally a city within a city. It's got its own organizing body. It's owned by the city, but it's got its own organizing body, the Merchants Association, the Historic Preservation piece, and all of those come into play in the stories. Sarah asked about Lavender Lies Bleeding, which you can sort of see the cover behind me. It might be backwards. I never know how these things work on Zoom, but I can show you the cover here. And it's awfully cute.
Yes, it is.
My editor kept saying when the designer was working on it, more lavender, and she obliged. So Sarah asked, what was the most rewarding moment that I experienced while writing Lavender Lies Bleeding? And this was really a fun story to write, even though there's death and destruction and all kinds of things like that, but done in the usual cozy fashion. And one of the most memorable moments for me was in April of 2024. I had just started writing the book, and my husband and I went out to Seattle. I went to Left Coast Crime, which is a mystery convention, a fan and reader convention, held somewhere in the West every year. And that year it happened to be in Seattle. And so he went out with me and visited some friends. And then we spent several days in the area. And one day we met up with my best friend from college, who still lives out there. And it's really, really great to have a best friend who still lives in the place where the books are set, because she and her family do a lot of ground truthing for me. She's also my chauffeur whenever I come out there. And on this particular visit, I had wanted to go up north of the city to the Tulip Festival. It had not been a thing when I lived out there, and I really wanted to go see it. And some of my friends said, it's going to be cold and rainy and crowded and muddy. And I said, great, let's go. And so we went with her, and we were leaving the Tulip Festival, which was really wonderful, a marvelous big tulip garden, and going over to a little town called La Conner, which is an old fishing village. And there's a lot of agriculture in the area. And on the way, I was in the back seat, and we drove by a barn, an old barn near an irrigation stream. And there were some shrubs and this tumble of red azaleas that was just tumbling down the hillside into the stream. And what does that have to do with lavender? Well, this whole experience of going to that tulip farm gave me a little more insight into what's called agritourism, and how farms have both a practical reason, growing the lavender, growing the tulip bulbs, but they also invite people in for an experience. And I wanted to capture that. I had at that point already been to several lavender farms in Washington and in Montana, and went to more later. But what happened with that barn and that azalea, that was a moment I wanted to capture. I don't think either Don, my husband, or Lita, my friend, saw it. They know about it now because they read the book. But that was a moment that crystallized for me this time and place. That's not actually the valley where the book is set, but it gave me this visual, and I hung on to that. And if you've had a chance to read Lavender Lies Bleeding, you'll know that Pepper, my main character, sees that barn and that red azalea. And it really helps her grasp this community, which is about 30 miles outside the city. This is the first book where a good chunk of the action is not in the city, but don't worry, we're in the market a lot too. And so that barn, actually, the barn does become an important part of the story, the barn and the farm where that is. And they are part of the motivation of several characters. That's a really long way of answering what was a short, sweet question, but that's kind of how I am and how writers are. But it was that visual that carried with it so much emotion and so much story potential that really, really got me pulled me into the story. And I hope it does the same for you when you read it.
Thank you so much. Our next question for you is, how do you approach writing dialogue? And do you have any tips for crafting authentic conversations?
Dialogue is really difficult. It's also really fun. And it does take some work, some revision. It's not normal conversation. You don't say, "Hi, how are you?" You just start talking when you're on the page. So you have to keep the semblance of real conversation, but boil it down. And there's so much subtext in dialogue in fiction. There's the thing that's being said underneath the actual words. And sometimes the words themselves will convey that, and sometimes we use bits of action to convey that. When people tell me that they like my dialogue, I'm really grateful. I really appreciate that because I work really hard on it.
Thank you so much. The next question is, do you use any specific tool or apps during your writing process? And are there any you've tried that just didn't work for you?
So a lot of writers use a tool called Scrivener, which is a computer program, and just the thought of it gives me the hives. I suppose I'm old-fashioned that way, but when I started practicing law, we were just getting computers on our desks, and so I learned to write on the computer, and I learned to use word processing software. And I still use that. I pretty much stick with the standard stuff that way. But I do have some other secret tools, and I'll hold them up and show you what I've got. I keep what is called a story Bible. And for me, it's a 3-ring binder that says on the side, Seattle Spice Shop Mysteries. And to give myself a visual, I've got some of my favorite postcards tucked in the front that show the market and the city. And then inside, I've got my character analyses. You know, for my ongoing characters, I need to know things like what color are their eyes and how old they are and where they live and all that. But also, I need to know for each book, what's their goal, what's their obstacle, what's their internal and external conflict. And all that's in here, along with a lot of other things, research notes, the outline for the book, which is a calendar with things scribbled on it. What are these things called? The style sheets that come from the publisher that tell us how we spell out words and street names and that sort of thing. I'm also a little bit of an artist, and so being visual helps me a lot. And so I've got a sketchbook, and I've got one of my favorite postcards of the market on the front. And inside, I have more images. I can show you a little bit. There's my sketch from the first day I decided to set this in the market, and I figured out the outline of Pepper's. Oh, there's her shop, and there are cards from spice shops and other places in the market where people have been helpful to me. So even though I'm really focused on the words, I'm also really visual, and I will sketch out various things that I've seen or that I want to put into the market. And I'm a planner, and I don't call myself a plotter, which some people do. There's this plotter pantser conversation that you have probably heard, people who plan and outline their books and people who write by the seat of their pants. I call myself a planner because I think a lot about the story and I think a lot about the characters in advance, and I'm of actually writing sentences. I will make a lot of notes about what I think is going to happen. There may be snippets of dialogue, there may be descriptions, and I'll put that in rough chronological order, what I think is going to happen. and what I think the key scenes are, and that will be my outline. It's more detailed than some writers and a lot less detailed than other writers. My friend Ellen Byron, whom I'm sure some of you know, or you know her books, writes a 30-page outline broken down by beats because she comes from the TV script writing world. The famous crime novelist Jeffrey Deaver spends months on his outline, far longer on the outline than he spends actually writing, because he has put so much thought into the outline. For me, the outline and planning process is really important. That's when a lot of the discovery happens for me. And then when I start to actually commit sentences, more discovery happens. So that's what I can tell you about writing tools. They're pretty simple for me.
Wonderful. Our next question is, what is your kryptonite as a writer?
So I don't pay any attention to the superhero world. And I actually, when I got your questions there, I had to go look up what kryptonite is. So I thought I knew, but I wasn't sure. It turns out I was wrong. I thought it was your superpower. It's actually kind of your weakness, which you guys are laughing. You knew better than I did. For me, I would have to say is the tendency to turn into a travel log, because I love the market so much, and the city of Seattle, and there's so much visual detail and sensory detail that I want to convey to people. I can get carried away. And you're not surprised listening to me. You're not at all surprised I can get carried away with things. And so I have to tone that down and make sure, actually, I don't mean I tone it down. I want it to be vivid, but I have to make sure that it is always in service of the story, that I don't dump in a paragraph about how great the fresh salmon look if it's not something that's going to move the story forward, and probably only a couple of quick images about the men and women at Pike Place Market in their long rubber boots and aprons, throwing fish back and forth and chanting with the crowd. That's enough right there. And then weave Pepper through it as she's working her way through the market. Those details always have to move the story forward, and I can get kind of caught up in them, trying to convey that sense to you. So that's where a lot of my purple editing pen comes in.
Well, the next question is about Pepper. Many of your fans laud Pepper Reese, the protagonist of your Spy Shop mysteries, as a great heroine. She's resourceful, quick, and sees herself as a woman who gets things done. Mm-hmm. What, if anything, would you say is Pepper's fatal flaw, or the trait that gets her in the most trouble?
Well, in Lavender Lies Bleeding, one of the challenges for her is recognizing that we are all forced to admit on occasion that we do things that are inconsistent with how we see ourselves. And I don't want to say anything more about that, except to point out that when you read the book, if you haven't yet, you'll know the moment I mean, near the end, when Pepper and Lena are out in the town of Salmon Falls. The other thing that sometimes gets Pepper into trouble is that she's got such a strong sense of justice and responsibility that it leads her into conflicts where the sensible person would call 911 and stay home. But if we didn't have characters like that, we wouldn't have anything to read, right? And I love these women, Pepper Reese, Clara Cosi in the Coffee House Mysteries, and so many others. Brooklyn in Kate Carlisle's Bookbinder series. They get into trouble, but they always do it for a good reason. They are always using their skills, their connection to the community, the things they understand that the official law enforcement investigators don't. And that's, I'll digress a little bit here. One of my theories about the cozy and why we like it so much is that we've got those two parallel tracks of investigation. we've got the official investigation by law enforcement and eventually by prosecutors and the work that's done in the justice system. And I was a lawyer for more than 40 years, 41 years. So I know that system. And that's really a crucial, critical part of our system. But in the cozy mystery, what we have with any amateur sleuth mystery, not just the cozy, is we've got a second parallel investigation done by the amateur sleuth, who is usually a woman with a shop or a connection to the community that invests her in it. And she can see things that the law enforcement officers can't see. She can make connections. She can ask questions. And one of the examples I often give does come from Kate Carlisle's Bookbinder series, where her character will know the value of the book that is the object in the investigation, or a big part of it, beyond its monetary value. She knows what it means to this particular collector to have a 1932 first edition, I'm making that up, of The Secret Garden. But that's the sort of thing that our cozy sleuths can understand, because they understand people and they can make connections. And that's one of the reasons we love them. But that ability does get them into trouble, and Pepper's no exception.
Thank you so much. And this one's a fun question about food. Of the delicious recipes included in your book, is there one in particular you find yourself returning to over and over again?
You know, it's funny that you ask that, because just last night I had to go get one of my books to get a recipe. I couldn't find it in my cookbook stack, my cookbook binder of the recipes I've made, but I was sure that it was in The Solace of Bay Leaves, which is set in the fall, and with the reference to bay leaves you might get, there's a lot of soup in it. And there's a tomato basil soup, and I had to go get the book to check the recipe. I will tell you right now, all the recipes in my books and the recipes I post on Mystery Lover's Kitchen are much tested in my home kitchen. I have no professional training as a cook except for watching Julia Child videos. But I have a lot of professional training as an eater, because I've been eating for a long time. And so I learned to cook because I wanted to eat more interesting things than I had grown up with. I did not grow up in a foodie family, except for Christmas cookies. And so the recipes in the books come some from family favorites, things we make. Sometimes I go searching for something because I need recipes that involve lavender, for example. And sometimes I will just eat something and think, Pepper wants to eat that, and you guys want to eat it too. Another example of that comes from that trip I mentioned to Seattle, where we went to a restaurant called Wild Ginger, and I had Indian butter chicken. I'd never had it before, oddly enough, and I loved it. And so we came home and we found some recipes and created what worked for us, and it made its way into the book. My husband is a doctor, and one of his patients a couple of weeks ago said, "Tell Leslie I really liked the Indian butter chicken." And he had to say, well, that's my recipe. It is mostly his recipe. So cooking is definitely a shared fun thing in our house.
Well, this will be our last question.
Okay.
The last question of our sheet. What projects are you currently working on, and can you offer any hints or teases for your upcoming work?
So my latest just came out 10 days ago, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. It is Murder in the Graveyard, a Destination Murders collection, or anthology, excuse me. It is short, cozy mysteries by 9 different authors. They don't all take place at Halloween, but mine does. Pepper and Kristen, and Pepper's the main character, and Kristen is her best friend. And they are invited by an old friend from high school to go on a midnight ghost tour at a cemetery. And things take a turn that they had not expected. This collection, or anthology, excuse me, is a lot of fun because you can read short stories by authors you may not know yet, or some like me who you do know, and just see what the characters are up to. And if you're interested in the characters, then you can follow up with the books. One of the contributors only writes short stories, but they are a series. And the rest of us write both short stories and books. So that's the latest thing. I hope to have a couple more short stories coming out next year in anthologies. And I am working on the third Alicia Beckman standalone. You can see Blind Faith behind me. That is the second. Those are written under a pen name that honors my mother and grandmother. And in this one, my main character is a young reporter from Seattle who discovers that her beloved grandfather may be an escaped killer from Montana. And I just wrote the final confrontation scene yesterday. It's terrible, but you can't edit the blank page, right? You have to have the words down. And that's one of my words of wisdom to writers: just get it down and then fix it later. So I don't have a contract for that book, which is tentatively titled The Birdwatcher's Daughter, but I hope to be able to shop it to publishers in a few weeks, and maybe we'll have some news for you soon.
Well, we look forward to that. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. Of course, I enjoy your books, and we wish you the best. Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. My pleasure. I hope to see you again online or in person somewhere along the road.
Thank you.
Thanks.